Well, thank you so much for joining us. So insights on lessons learned, where we are so far, what lies ahead, some perhaps what we've just touched on before, and that common theme that we're talking about how do we put principles into practice, and what does that mean in terms of turning that into compliance, audit, and enforcement? Where are you on that journey, and where are you heading? And when we take stock of where we were, so we met in December last year, then February in 2024, 2 months after we met here, the previous government announced its response to the AI white paper, confirmed that direction of travel that was being taken, and announced funding support for regulators to do that job, and called for regulators to publish plans in terms of going forward. Now we have a new government growth agenda that we've talked about before, plans ahead. So kind of where are we now and where are we heading is probably a good place to start. But Kate, before we do that, before we launch in, because there's a lot to cover in, and a lot of people, this is the biggest panel we've ever had here, so this is going to be a challenge. But Kate, perhaps help us set the scene for the conversation. And how does digital regulation contribute to ethical AI? How do the two work together? And what has the DRCF currently been doing to promote that approach and good AI governance? Can you help us set the scene?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sue, and thank you for inviting us all back again. I think it's
You're welcome.
Really good.
Thank
to
you
have
for
the
saying yes.
To speak. I think a bit like Christmas, I can't believe how quickly the time of the year has come round again to be here. And the first thing I would say is that I think what we've heard from this morning is that guardrails in AI are absolutely essential. And what I really like is the way that the discussion on ethics and the discussion on regulation have been coming together, because they used to be quite separate. Yeah. And so actually, if you think about it, regulation is like the scaffolding, the structure around which your ethics then sit. Ethics can then be your higher ceilings, your extra fittings, the way that a company chooses to add to the regulation that there is. And so all of our regulators in their sectors have been doing a tremendous amount on AI regulation this year, and you're going to hear about that from them, and indeed our non-member regulators as well. I'll talk about DRCF in a second. But we heard from DSIT a few minutes ago reinforcing that sectoral approach. And that sectoral approach is absolutely vital, because AI is everywhere. It's a bit like electricity, as other people have said. It comes into everything. You can't collapse everything into one regulator. So taking that sectoral approach is absolutely key. And each regulator is taking very significant steps to regulate AI using their existing tools within their existing areas. So these days, if you think about financial services regulation, part of that is thinking about AI regulation. If you think about media regulation, the same. And the same for any sector. So I don't want anybody to underestimate for a second how much work there is being done on AI regulation within those sectors. So where does the DRCF fit in? Well, this will be familiar to many people, but for those to whom it's not, we are essentially a connective tissue between 4 regulators. So the regulators who are here, apart from Ofgem, who is another regulator that we speak to, as we do with other regulators as well. We don't have any statutory powers or powers of our own. As I say, we act as this coherence and collaboration device between our regulators. And what are we doing? Well, we have twin goals. One is protecting consumers, and the other is enabling innovation and growth. And just to give a couple of examples of what we're doing in the AI space, one, between all of our member regulators, we are running the AI and Digital Hub that we launched back in April with government funding as a pilot year. This is a service that enables innovators to come to us with a query about how their innovation in the AI and digital space is affected by regulation within our 4 members' remits. And we will take their query, work with them to help shape it into a pointed query about regulation, and then aim for a consolidated response across our regulators. And we're now midway through that pilot service. In addition, we do a lot of work internally on all sorts of aspects of AI. There are weekly meetings between our AI team. We do things like joint research together. We've done a lot of work together on the AI assurance market that we've heard about this morning. And I thought, because this is an ethics event, I thought I'd just give one example. And it's something that we published a few months ago on AI fairness. Fairness, of course, being a really important ethical principle. we brought our 4 regulators together and said, okay, what does fairness mean to each of you? And for each of them, of course, it means avoiding discrimination on the basis of protected characteristics. It means fair treatment. It means avoiding algorithmic bias, an area on which, of course, there's still loads to do. But it also, and this is the interesting point, I think, it also means different things in different statutory remits. So, for example, in the ICO, it includes fairness in data processing, which entails a fairness by design approach to AI development. In Ofcom, they have a fair practices framework, which concerns fairness in industry standards and pricing for consumers. In the FCA, their consumer duty requires firms to act in good faith to deliver good outcomes for retail customers. And at the CMA, their expectation of fair dealing warns businesses against anti-competitive conduct. So what's really interesting about bringing those together is that, first of all, it means that regulators and others aren't talking past each other. When we use this word fair, we're actually talking about a whole host of different things. But also, it helps for industry and others to be able to see what people mean when they're talking about fairness, and how then, because you were talking earlier about industry developing their own practices in their companies, how they set that up, taking account of these various requirements.
Thank you, Kate, and thanks for setting that scene. In the interest of time, we're going to move on to our rest of our panel, if that's right, because we want to try and leave some time for questions as well. So hopefully I'm going to see what I can do, but I'm going to try my very best. So let's go to I'm really keen to hear from the other members of the DRCF, and then Stu will definitely come to you. But Stephen, perhaps could start with you from the ICO's point of view. We've heard a little bit from Kate in terms of what you've been doing together, but what's been your priority areas, work priority issues this year? What's been the main focus? And any lessons learned already as we kind of come to the end of the year of how the work has developed this year?
Thank you so much. Well, look, kind of what a year. A bit like Kate, I can't quite believe we're back here again. We started out at the beginning of this year with a New Year's resolution that at the ICO we were going to bring real regulatory clarity and certainty to how data protection and law applies to generative AI. And we kicked it off with a whole series of consultations on things like, is it lawful to scrape personal data from the web to use it to train your models? Is it, how should organizations be going through making sure that people can exercise their rights when their data is being used to train models? Questions like, should we interpret concepts in data protection law like accuracy when it comes to generative AI outputs and questions of hallucinations? So no small package of stuff to kind of crunch through. And so we've been engaging a lot with players across the market to try and gather views, setting out our own draft positions, and gathering perspectives on actually how should we be interpreting and ultimately enforcing the law in this space. At the same time, we have been responding to a range of products coming to market, and those of you who have been watching us closely will have seen interventions around some firms, some very large technology firms, some of whom may be in this room, own approaches to rolling out model training and processing in the UK. And what I'd like to say around that is, in terms of kind of what we've learned, is actually we can make proportionate, and I hope sort of sensible, light touch interventions in this space where we provide feedback, organisations go, right, okay, stop, take a moment, get it right, get the product to market.
So they're collaborative kind of approach.
Indeed. So we're seeing a lot of that, more of that come forward. Of course, keeping with my Christmas theme, we are about to give everybody a Christmas present in the form, so we will be coming out before Christmas setting out our views on the answers to some of these questions following that whole consultation series. And looking into 2026, you can expect us to also join up some of the answers to those questions with regulatory partners. So we've been doing this work really closely, in particular, big shout out for the Competition and Markets Authority, because we have been working through how do you take forward these interpretations of the law around privacy, for example, in conjunction with actually how it interrelates with other areas.
Oh, that's a great segue into Will. Although, Stephen, just to clarify, 2026 or 2025?
I've lost any concept of time at this point in the year, yes. 2025.
Made me think, it's like, what year is it next year? But Will, great segue into what you've been doing at the CMA, what's been your priority in areas. We know that you've just launched an AI lab as well, so perhaps talk a little bit about that, but what's been your focus for, since we last saw you on this stage? Well, I've seen you since then, but since you were last here.
Yes, thanks very much for having me. And yes, hopefully a nice segue. At the CMA, we're very focused on making sure that the opportunities of AI for growth and the growth of the broader technology markets are realised to the maximum extent possible. And I should say the focus on growth is a very long-standing position, actually. Some may not see that. But we described growth as one of our top 3 outcomes we were looking to achieve right back in our annual plan at the beginning of 2023. And extensive evidence shows you that where competition is stronger, productivity and wage growth will also be higher. And of course, competition is a really important catalyst for innovation, whether that's in AI or elsewhere. And that's then central to growth in any modern economy. And if we want the UK to be a leader in AI, as lots of people in this room I think have been wanting today, then it's going to take innovation, investment, collaboration from companies of all shapes and sizes. So our work in this area is particularly focused on, there are actually lots of things to do with AI, broader use of algorithms going back again several years, but the big thing this year has been our work on foundation models, where we were thinking through the opportunities and risks from a competition and consumer protection point of view. And the report we produced in April on this flagged 3 potential risks, in particular to effective competition. One was the possibility that firms controlling key inputs might limit access to those to shield themselves from competition. The second was that powerful incumbents could use their positions in consumer or business-facing markets to distort choice in foundation model-based services and at that deployment layer. And thirdly, we flagged the role of partnerships involving key players, which could potentially reinforce or extend existing positions of market power through the value chain. I think it's important to emphasise that we were flagging these potential risks only, not diagnosing them as things that had actually come to pass. And they realised that the reason for wanting to share that analysis and flag those risks was in order to try and make sure those risks don't materialise, and to try and allow firms, large and small, to access the kind of opportunities that we see.
It's a bit like an early warning system.
Yeah, effectively, yes. And far from being a sort of major regulatory intervention, what we came up with in particular were 6 principles that we thought were important to maximise the benefits, minimise the risks, which I direct you to the report in April, but were at a headline level: access to key inputs, diversity of models, choice for both businesses and consumers and avoiding lock-in, fair dealing, as Kate mentioned earlier, so that means avoiding anti-competitive self-preferencing or tying or bundling, and then perhaps to really go to the sort of ethics language, transparency both for businesses and for consumers, and also accountability right throughout the value chain.
Thanks, Will. And apologies, Ed, I said the AI Lab was the CMA, and it's not. Apologies.
That's all right.
So, apologies for that. So a great, I'd love to come to you, the work that this FCA has been doing this year, what's been key, and then tell us about the AI Lab that I know that you've been launching. Tell us a little bit about also that includes the AI impact zones as well. Tell us what you've been focusing on.
Yeah, so like others, we want to build a safe and responsible environment for AI, but also do so in a way that encourages innovation. And as Sue says, we've had a long history of innovating with firms in financial services and opening up the regulatory doors, if you like, to innovators and firms that want to experiment. And our innovation lab has been a key area of that over the last 10 years. And last month we celebrated our 10th anniversary. We've had 1,000 firms that have come through our innovation services over that time. And we launched on the back of that our AI lab. And really what we're seeking to do there is engage specifically with AI innovators in financial services, with fintech firms, both to help them guide through the regulatory process to understand how the regulations impact on them, also to put a spotlight really on the sort of use cases of AI in financial services, so we can encourage a dialogue around what those look like and what the sorts of challenges that regulators and consumers and innovators will face. But also to get input and start that dialogue with a broad community, including the ethics community, academics, firms, technologists, around what is a sensible regulatory approach here is. So 3 things we're setting up: the input zone, which is on our website, which is encouraging people to give feedback on how they see the regulatory challenges, what they see to be the opportunities as well as much as the challenges of AI in financial services, and the sorts of things and suggestions for where there might be regulatory gaps, for example. So that's open and that's available on the website. We're also running a AI sprint in January, so 2 days, 29th and 30th of January. We will be bringing together a host, again, of firms, technologists, ethics specialists, academics to really run through. So first of all, to think, well, what's the next 5 years look like in financial services in terms of AI? Where are we going to see the changes? What sort of challenges is that going to present? And then to have a discussion about really what does that mean for the way that we regulate, and what are going to be the challenges for consumers and innovators and so forth. And opportunities as well, I should add to that too. So that is an event we'd love to see you all sign up for. The sign up is on the website, and please come along. Prior to that, we're hosting a spotlight event. So again, looking at particularly use cases in financial services of AI, and putting the spotlight on those. So in order to inform that conversation, what sorts of things are happening already? What can we learn from that? What are the challenges? So yeah, big piece of innovation development on that side in terms of the AI lab.
I'd say already reflection of there's a lot of activity that's happened since we last met, and back to that putting this into practice seems to be a kind of key theme we keep coming back to. But Yi, we'd love your view on what have you been focusing on in Ofcom, but also reflections or lessons that you think you've learned through that work as we kind of reflect on the end of the year. What stands out for you?
Thank you, Sue, and it's great to be back again. You mentioned the government's white paper towards the beginning of the year, and we put out our strategic approach to AI in March. And some of the things we covered there was, as a sector regulator, it wouldn't of course surprise you that our focus is very much on the use cases, the services that people use rather than specific technologies. And of course, AI and the family of technologies related to that are very much prevalent throughout telecoms, broadcasting, and services related to online safety. I would observe, though, that there were some themes that we drew out from that. So synthetic media, and I know we've got a panel later on. I mean, some huge benefits of that technology. For example, giving actors who have suffered from illness or disease their voice back, or second theme around personalization. I mean, how wonderful to have services which are much more appropriate to what I'm looking for and targeted. And then security and resilience, where some of these technologies can help to predict where there might be faults and engage in preventative measures and stuff like that. So as Will says, I think we very much see this as how do we maximize the benefits while mitigating the risks? And clearly things I just mentioned carry some risks too. Just as an example of that, focusing specifically on online safety, in July we put out a couple of discussion papers, one on deceptive deepfakes, how interventions in different parts of the tech supply chain might help, things like prompt filters, watermarking to give a bit of a sense of metadata and provenance about where the contents come from, or detection classifiers, even when you don't have that information. And of course, really important is how as users we are better equipped in terms of critical awareness, skills, media and digital literacy to be able to navigate our way online safely. Alongside that, we put out a discussion paper on red teaming, what the strengths and limitations of some of those techniques are as we engage in model testing. And then more recently, we published an open letter on how generative AI chatbots are, in certain circumstances, within scope of the Online Safety Act. You may recall that there was some pretty concerning stuff around impersonation of deceased children. So we wanted to remind everyone that actually where those are user-to-user services or search services, they are already within the scope of the Online Safety Act, and there are requirements around risk assessments and mitigations. So it's been a busy year. I guess, I mean, to you, what have we learned? Not very profound, I'm afraid, but it is a space that is moving very, very rapidly. And I guess we recognize we can't stand still. We have to continually invest in our research, our understanding, and then, as you said, getting on and doing that. Our partnership with the others here through the DRCF is really important. I'd observe actually globally as well, though, we put a lot of effort into speaking to other regulators who are essentially all wrestling with the same questions and sharing those insights and best practice.
Thank you so much, and giving all of you for giving those updates. Stuart, welcome to the Digital Ethics Summit. Thank you so much for being with us and for joining this panel. It's great to have Ofgem here. Obviously not a DRCF member, but we wanted to bring in that non-DRCF perspective in terms of this conversation. Now, you've got a crucial role, of course, in helping us to keep the lights on and keeping our energy bills affordable, but I wanted to focus down on your role in terms of governing AI and its use in your sector, in your area. How have you been shaping your approach to putting the principles that were in the white paper into action and back to that into practice? What have you been focusing on this year? But welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. And as you can imagine, without energy, nothing's going to happen. Absolutely nothing's going to happen. You get no comms, you get no financial systems, you get no AI at all. So this year, there's a number of different things, but from an AI perspective, in June, July, I think it was, we also published our strategic approach. I'm actually now thinking, we were going to actually publish before Christmas our AI guidance. I'm actually now wondering whether we should do it after Christmas, to be fair. It's for consultation, so there's a sort of 3-month consultation, but maybe we should do it after Christmas. I'll have a chat with my team about that. So that guidance comes out, and ethics are right at the heart of it,
Yeah.
and sustainability is also at the heart of it as well. And so that will be coming out. We're obviously looking for comments on there. That is a framework that's largely based around governance, risk, capability, what we're expecting the industry to do, with references to various different ISO standards, 42001, 240, etc., on the biasing side of things as well. So there's references to that. After that, we will then be coming out with our regulatory sandbox and also our tech sandbox as well for people to work on there. As an aside, but I think this is an important aside, as I just said, without energy planning, none of this is going to take place anyway, so it's really, really important. So most people are probably unaware, though it is in the public domain, that to meet the government's targets, there is literally billions of pounds that need to be spent over the next few years in building our infrastructure. Most of the infrastructure is legacy, it's 1970s, 1980s, so, or even post-war. So we absolutely have to rebuild that, and that means new generators. Obviously, there'll still be some gas generators that need to be built to deal with peak, but also, obviously, renewable generators, onshore, offshore, all the transmission systems. And of course, there's this massive influx of data centers that want to come into the UK investment, irrespective of AI. They just want to come in and invest anyway, and so they want energy. Just as an aside, in the US, there's some entities, they're probably present here, that are looking at purchasing nuclear capability in the US to generate, to support their data center usage. So we're working with the energy system operator, because we do all the financials around this, to actually put the spatial planning, where all this is going to fit, how it's all going to fit together quickly, so that we can roll this technology out. And of course, AI is going to be the heart of all of that.
Yeah, and a key enabler of doing that as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the future, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that At the moment, it's fairly easy to balance the system to make sure your frequencies are balanced, supply and demand. I always say, if you want to knock out a system, forget cyber attacks, you could just persuade everybody to turn their kettle on at the same time, and you will have rolling blackouts.
Don't do that, though, please.
Fortunately, we're not coordinated enough. But what I was saying was that in essence, we are working really fast with the system operators to make sure that we have all of this in place in the future.
Really important conversations, and we definitely have to have those conversations with you guys next year, so definitely look forward to those opportunities. And also, Stuart, that's a whole panel in itself, so I have to bring you back to talk more about that.
And we will, we're in a slightly different place to the other regulators in one respect. When it comes to enforcement, we in some areas, not necessarily in retail, but in some areas we can't afford to wait until an activity happens. It's no good having blackouts and possibly cause of death. We actually have to be proactive in the way that we actually regulate and enforce, especially with AI around this.
Yeah, very interesting, and I might come on to that in a moment, because I had a question for all of you in terms of, as we move from, obviously, from what we talked about last year in terms of the principles and the approach, and now we're putting this into action, what's the focus for going forward? But Kate, before we do that, great to have Stuart on the panel as well, and great to bring that wider regulator conversation here. And just coming back to that kind of how the DRCF members and non-members are working together, opportunities and limitations of working together. Do you see, particularly the DRCF members and the non-DRCF members need to work more together, because these issues are intersecting, right? I'm sure, Stuart, there are data protection, data privacy issues that perhaps come up in relation to your work. So, how do we make sure that we get deeper collaboration, or is deeper collaboration more of what we need?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. First, it is absolutely great to have Ofgem here, and I think to expose everybody to how AI has impacts, a really tangible example of how it has impacts in another sector to ours. When the DRCF was established, it was digital, and we were thinking primarily at that point about digital platforms, and I would still see our 4-member regulators as being key digital regulators. But when it comes to AI affects every sector.
It goes beyond that, right?
And beyond, exactly, and gaps as well, as AI is absolutely everywhere. So as far as we are concerned, we've no immediate plans to expand our membership, but we do talk to other regulators. We run a regulators roundtable. The ICO also has a regulators and AI working group, which brings in quite a number of regulators. But I think there's a challenge here, which is perhaps for government rather than for us, which is that everybody has been on this big sort of transitional journey and is still. And you've got a lot of regulators in the UK of a lot of different sizes. And I think people are in different places on that journey. And you need to make sure that regulators as a whole have got the resources and you were talking about skills and capabilities, I think, on the last panel, the skills and capabilities to be able to address the very rapid transformation being wrought by AI in their sectors.
Well, that's interesting, because I was going to ask, I mentioned right at the top, what we've seen since we last met, and part of that was the previous government, announcing a regulators fund. I think it was 10 million to provide regulators with the resources, the expertise, the skills that what you guys need. I suppose it's a question, is that fund still needed? Obviously, new government now. Is that fund still important? Is that fund still what you guys think you need in terms of what's next? And if so, what do you need funding, or what do you need to fund to help you in terms of what you see coming down the line?
I'm confident that funding is still needed. I mentioned that our AI and digital hub is being funded by government funding at the moment. We wouldn't have been able to do it otherwise. And I think I'll leave it to the regulators to talk about things that would benefit them. But I think for the wider body of regulators who aren't here as well, as I mentioned, there is quite a lot to do to be thinking about the implementation of AI ethics, the principles we've been talking about, and the transformation being wrought by AI in their sectors.
Yeah, would anybody else like to come where funding? Yeah.
Well, just to support Kate's point, I think we're very fortunate at Ofcom, because with the Online Safety Act, we've been able to bring in some great expertise and resources. We now have about 60 AI experts across our data and tech teams. but I'm very conscious that there are other smaller regulators we partner with who are less fortunate, and I agree with Kate, that's a really necessary investment.
Yeah, Will?
Yeah, a similar view actually on smaller and bigger organisations.
You think that's where the funding's most needed?
Quite possibly. I mean, I think, so I think we need to both get the tools right and the capabilities and skills right. I mean, on the tools front, for our part, a bit like me on our Safety Act going through, since we last spoke, the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act has gone through. That's a very flexible tool that can enable us to think about AI just as it does other areas of importance in digital markets. But on the skills and capabilities side, I mean, it is a sort of never-ending struggle, frankly, to get the right people in. But I think in being a bit of a bigger scale, like others here, we've been able to build a really good team in our data unit, data scientists, data engineers, behavioural scientists, technology experts. Those are absolutely critical for doing so many things we do, even now, not necessarily just the technology-facing investigations, but others too, where we're using AI, or piloting the use of AI tools in evidence review, for example.
Yeah, so to help you do your job.
Yeah, but I think that would be a lot harder in a smaller organisation, I suspect.
Stephen?
So I think there's definitely more work to be done here. I think that in many respects, looking at how you kind of create a short-term fund is perhaps kind of only a first step towards the challenge of what is really kind of creating a structural change in how the regulatory ecosystem is working here. We're expecting the pressures to come from AI and remain pressures as kind of long-term things. And I think there's been some really good thinking that we've seen that's gone into some things like the AI Safety Institute, where there's been starting to grapple with some of the difficult questions around how do you fund, how do you attract some of that scarce expertise. I think we need to start to spread some of that thinking more broadly across the regulatory ecosystem. Interesting.
I'm going to pause there just so that we allow some time for some questions, if that's all right. I've got plenty, but that's not really what this job is about. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. All right. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to take a few at a time, if that's all right, folks. Does that make sense to you? Is that all right with you guys?
Sure.
All right, so stick your mitts up. God, my mother would hate me. Let's take the gentleman there, and then if you could just pass the mic to the gentleman behind you, and then I'll come back for a couple more, if that's all right. Go ahead. And keep them as punchy as you can, please. That would really help me.
Central to regulation is a word that's come up quite a lot for each of you, which is collaboration. But there's a kind of baby form and there's a kind of grown-up form. I'm just wondering how many of you are working with a grown-up form. The baby one is just getting people to connect, have conversations and maybe contribute to each other. But there's a dividing line, and that is the line of commitment and getting people to commit to collaborate and create things together that they can communicate out to wider audiences. And I'm just wondering, for each of you, how many of you are working on the baby side of collaboration, and how many of you actually securing commitments to get people to actually do stuff?
All right, thank you for that question. Then if you could just pass the mic, thank you. Collaboration, you see, love
thanks. In the UK AI regulatory system, is there a real risk of regulatory capture? And if there isn't, why isn't there? And if there is, what steps do you take individually or as organisations to mitigate it?
Okay, so 2 questions to kick us off. And then if people could put their hands up, then I know where I'm coming next. So collaboration, is it real collaboration, or is it collaboration that's leading to commitments? And then the risk of regulatory capture, is that real? Who would like to kick off? Stephen, and then I'll come to Kate, if that's all right.
So I'll try and avoid the quotable phrase around kind of adult form and baby form in this space, but I will say that the collaboration that we're driving forward is extremely mature, and that, I think, real collaboration involves talking about where there's not just synergies between your remits, there's also tensions, and working those through. I mentioned, for example, the work that we have been doing with the CMA, but actually that's really enabled us to go, okay, if the CMA is saying this about how the market could evolve in terms of the opportunities from kind of open access right the way through to closed access, how do we talk about actually how, in line with data protection law, you can kind of take any place on that spectrum, but the controls, the requirements that we might ask of people might be a little bit different. What you might be doing with APIs at one end of the spectrum, you might have to do with contractual controls at another end of the spectrum, but keeping that flexibility in mind. So I really think we've gone well beyond the point of just being nice to each other, but also, you know, deep into the having the difficult conversations about how this could really work across the whole of the market.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Kate?
Stephen has more or less answered it for me, given the shortage of time. I mean, our collaboration is very real. My role and my team's role is to make sure that it is real. But as I think Stephen has given the perfect illustration of how working through real tensions and actually finding ways through them, and you can see all the outputs of that on our website, which is drcf.org.uk. You can actually see those being worked through in real time and the documents that come out of that for us and for others too.
Will?
Just briefly on regulatory capture.
Yeah.
So we at CMA, we worry about market failure. There is also, there can be regulatory failure, and one of the ways that can happen is regulatory capture. In the digital markets regime, we've set out our stall in wanting to be participative, collaborative, really engaging, open, drawing in all kinds of input, and that's really important. But we do need to be very laser-focused, absolutely laser-focused on the evidence, and to bear in mind that every company has its own commercial objectives, and that's completely fine, that's how markets work. But of course, that does mean that sometimes we hear quite self-interested reasoning, and we have to go through that to the evidence to work out what's going on. We have I'm sure we all do lots of checks and balances to make sure that capture doesn't get sort of embedded. Some of that's our decision-making structures, various independent checks and balances in that way. As we go through, we'll be doing things like moving people from sector to sector to make sure they don't get too tied up in one area. But it's a really important question.
Interesting, too embedded in just one space. Interesting. Okay, last round of questions, so I'm going to take as many as I can. So, keep your hands up. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. So whoever has the mic speaks first, right? So do you want to go ahead, and then I'll take the two here, and then one right at the back. So let's just take those four very, very quickly, and then we'll have to wrap it up. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Sue, and thank you for an excellent discussion. I'm Maeve Walsh, I'm from the Online Safety Act Network. I was very much struck by Kate's comment at the beginning about different concepts of fairness across the regulators, and also that one of the earlier panellists talked about safety by design as being an important part of approaching kind of AI development, particularly in the absence of legislation. I just wondered, given that there are lots of different by design frameworks already across regulators, whether that conversation about what safety by design means in the different regulatory frameworks.
Okay, safety by design, and I'm afraid I'm being told off, so I'm only going to be able to take one more. I'm sorry, sir. This gentleman here with the grey jacket has had his hand up for a very long time. I'm sorry. Don't hate me. But I think folks will be around over lunch. So if we could get the microphone, collaboration, guys, pass it along. Doing brilliantly. Well done. So safety by design, and then your question.
Thanks,
and then we'll have to final thoughts, and we'll have to round it up. So go ahead.
Quickly, so Chris Steele, KPMG. It's probably a question for Kate, but other members of the DRCF, please do chip in. Big fan of what you're doing. Connection, collaboration, obviously absolutely key. You've got a huge amount of practitioners in the room here. What would be your ask of the practitioners in the room here in terms of how they engage with these topics?
Ah, brilliant. So safety by design, and then what's the call to action for the people in the room? Who wants to kick off? Safety by design? Chief?
I'm not happy to do safety by design. So safety by design absolutely is core across everything, certainly within Ofgem. We actually, I was thinking about the calibration side of things. We actually get the industries to speak to each other and share concepts. If you think about it, actually if there's an outage and it's not secure by design, safety by design, AI, the safety by design, then actually it's going to affect everybody. What I wake up every morning worrying about is systemic failure of the energy system. And I'm talking about actually systemic failure. So generators going down at the same time, transmission systems going down. And so actually when you speak to the chief executives of the organisations that we regulate, we say to them, share, talk to each other, communicate. You're not really in competition, sorry CMA, you're not really in competition when it comes to things like safety at all.
Thank you, Stuart. And then Ed, just conscious of call to action is to come and get involved in your activity,
I
right?
would absolutely encourage you to get on our website and sign up for the AI Sprint. January, there you go, in the new year, 25.
25, there you go. Well, on that note, we're going to have to bring this fascinating conversation to a close. We could have gone on, but please can we thank Ed, Stephen, Chi, Stuart, Kate, and Will for all their contributions and a brilliant panel. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Right. And we'll see you all next year, same time, same place. Right. Well, next we are moving to our first breakouts of the day. So here we